Welcome, greetings everyone, to our final video on the time value of money. In this video specifically, we will conclude with calculating waiting times and interest rates, and then we'll do a final application of the time value of money concepts in referencing a lottery cash flow choice. And finally, we'll summarize it all with our top 10 essential points of the TVM. So, waiting time and interest rates. Well, just like we discussed in chapter 3, we're always dealing usually with 4 variables, okay? And of course, if we have 3 of these 4 variables, we can solve for the 4th one. I don't know if easily is the right term, but definitely in terms of spreadsheets, we can do so, I guess so. Now, one thing we haven't discussed yet is N and R, okay? So this is really the focus on this final video. So what do we mean by N? Well, number of periods, right? So for instance, if we want to figure out how many deposits it would take to reach a retirement or investment goal, this would be an example. Remember, the higher the investment rate or growth rate, the shorter time it takes the present value to reach that future goal. And also, if we want to figure out the rate of return that's required to reach a retirement goal given a fixed monthly deposit, we can figure out or solve for R. Now, I will say solving for R mathematically is quite a iterative process or trial and error kind of process. Luckily, we can use the power of computing to complete this process. So let's look at an example. In this case, we're trying to figure out, again, that number of periods or number of years. Martha, she's looking forward to saving up to buy her dream home. She needs a $100,000 down payment. She figures she can set aside $8,000 and earn 8% annually on her deposit. So in other words, how many periods or how long will she have to wait until she can buy that dream home? So again, because we're using the calculator or the spreadsheet, we just really have to understand that we're now trying to solve for N. Okay, so we're going to input that in, and we should get in this case, it looks like it takes 9 periods or 9 years to save up that $100,000 if we can invest $8,000 a year at a rate of 8%. So that's method 1. Method 2 is using Excel. And with Excel, we're just going to be using the NPR function, okay? And again, remember that we use type 0 because we're using it at the end of the period. And in this case, again, we should look like we get the identical number of years of 9 years, okay? So just a little reminder on how we can solve for not just future value and present value, but also number of periods in both Excel and our financial calculator. So finally, looking at our final question, which is the good news is we won the lottery. The bad news is we have 2 choices. And those choices are, how do we get our lottery winnings? Okay, so the first lottery option or payout option is we can get an annual lottery payment for a fixed number of years. Okay, so every year we get a payment and it's fixed for, let's say, 30 years. Okay, so that's one option. Second option is we can get it all right away. Okay, so that's a lump sum payment. So which option is better? There's a lot to consider here, but in both options, there is an implied rate of return. Okay, so that's important to think about, and this is very important moving forward, is that there's always the implied or rate of return or reinvestment rate. The idea that you can reinvest your money. This is really the power of the time value of money. Okay, so we're not just taking that lump payment out and not investing it. We're implying that we're going to use that money to see if we can, grow that money. And we'll look at that example here. Okay, so again, this is a more specific example. So in this case, yes, we won the lottery, and we have the choice. We can either get a lump sum of $26 million, or we can basically get paid out over 30 years and get an annuity of $1.625 million each year, all right? Now again, without even thinking about time value of money, if you don't assume any investment options, then sure, you might say, well, isn't it obvious that we want to get the 30-year deal because, that's over $30 million. But remember, money now is more valuable than money later. because of that implied rate of return, the implication that our money can grow. So this is what we really have to figure out, is we need to figure out, or in this case, really, we're trying to figure out what is that interest rate that's equal to either getting $26 million right now or getting a payout of $1.625 million over the next 30 years. Okay, so that's what we have to figure out. And then once we have that rate, then we can make that decision based off of that rate. Okay, so again, if we're going to use a financial calculator, what we're doing is we're figuring out the present value, which is 26 million, okay? And we're basically trying to figure out what rate is equal to getting $26 million now versus getting payments of 1.625 million over the next 30 years, okay? And that's what we're computing here. So we're actually computing the interest rate that's equal to that, okay? So that's what we've calculated, okay? And now we understand basically that when we're making that decision, okay? Because remember, if the interest rate, if we can take that $26 million and we can find some form of investment where we can get an interest rate of 4.625 or higher, then it's better to take that money out now, okay? So in other words, if our investment rate is 6.25 or higher, and again, we're assuming that this is over the next 30 years, okay? So this rate is going to be higher or equal to for the next 30 years, then yes, we can actually, overall, we can make more money in the next 30 years if we take the lump sum now and reinvest it, okay? So that's what we would choose, assuming that's the investment rate we can get, okay? Now, if we can't get that rate, so in other words, if we can't find an option where we can invest that money at a rate at 4.65 or lower, or higher, then it's actually better to take the annuity option because that means that we're going to be making more money over the next 30 years, okay? So you can start to see it's actually a little bit more complex. And we actually, in a way, we have to really determine or predict the future because sometimes it's very hard to decide or conclude that we are going to get a rate or investment rate higher. But those discussions will come up throughout this course and the next course. So, but again, just want you to start understanding the value of calculating, particularly the interest rate and what that means in terms of our investment decision. Okay, so let's finish this time value money business with a little top 10 summaries. Okay, and really this is no particular order. Okay, first is understanding that we can only add and subtract money if they're at the same point in time. Because remember, with time value money, different points in time is really, you can't compare the two. So you have to make sure that you're dealing with the right or identical times, whether it's the future value or the present value. Okay. Second is, and this really is implied in the first, is that the timing of money is really important, right? So again, just like that example, do you take the $26 million now, or do you take the $1.6 million over 30 years? Well, the timing of when we're getting that money makes a difference on the value. And in dealing with time, it's really important to draw a timeline. Okay, so that's going to help us understand and illustrate those decisions. Remember, when we're dealing with present value, okay, so we're moving backwards from our future value, we're discounting that value. Okay, when we deal with future value calculations, we're looking at it at a single point in the future. Okay, so remember those individual future values. We want to figure out when we're actually recognizing that value, if it's in 5 years or 10 years, and then that's when we make that assessment. Next is remembering that annuity is a series of equal cash flows. Okay, so that's what we mean by that annuity. Another important one, just like we mentioned with the 4 variables, right? So remember, we have 3 of the 4 variables. We should be able to solve for the 4th. And we've been looking at 3 options in terms of how we solve for these variables. First, we've shown you the equations, right? We've also discussed the time value money keys. Okay, so if you use a financial calculator. And finally, most likely what you'll be practicing more with is using our spreadsheet to solve for these time value figures. Number 9, 3 basic ways to repay a loan. Okay, so this is a little refresher: discount loans, interest-only loans, and of course, amortized loans. And finally, important just to realize that, particularly as we get into more complex scenarios, we can't always classify everything nicely into time, interest rate, payment, and future. There's other variables we have to consider. Okay, so just keep that in mind that not everything is guaranteed, but it's a good foundational start. So really important to have a grasp of these points. It's going to help us with more complex financial problems that we will be dealing with in the future. Wonderful. So those have been our specific objectives for this video. Thanks for watching and happy financing.